The Clear Signal with Steve Vischer is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Vischer.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back for another week of The Clear Signal. Great to have you with us, and I hope you've had a great week since last time we spoke. You know what? This is our 20th show in the series. I'm really proud of that, and I'm so looking forward to speaking to this week's guest because we're covering a couple of subjects that I just love. One of those is technology, and the other is motoring. I hope you like those subjects too. We've got lots to talk about. First up, though, clearsignal.com.au, of course, is the website. Don't forget you can catch up on back editions of all our shows there, and you can share them around on your social media if you'd like, and spread the love, all that sort of stuff. And also my contact details are there if you'd ever like to drop me a line. Always happy to hear from you. Now, ahead this week, we're going to be looking at the current state of play with Australia's automotive market. What's selling, what's not. And I might even have a bit of a chat about electric vehicles. Are you a fan of those? You know what? I don't know that I'm entirely convinced I want one. Not yet anyhow, but I do know that many people who drive them are very enthusiastic for them. We're going to be joined by motoring journalist John Cadogan. He's going to join us in the second half hour, and I'm really keen to get his views on that subject and many others as well. But first up, we're going to have a look at the subject of technology and the possible threat to the way we're able to use it by the powers that be in Canberra. They've been up to all sorts of skullduggery, you may have heard, and there's been some legislation, in fact, that might have threatened our ability to exercise free speech here. That's been, I'm pretty happy that's been knocked back in the Senate, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I guess that's where we might kick things off, but we got so much more to talk about in the field of technology. I could probably spend 2 hours talking about that one. Trevor Long is one of Australia's foremost technology commentators and always a very busy man, and I'm very grateful he's been able to join us today. Trevor, it's great to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I followed your work for so many years, Trevor, and I know you love to talk about technology and all the things that go with it. I think one of the biggest aspects of technology that everybody uses, no matter what your experience is something to do with communications. In fact, you and I are doing it right now online. And we're seeing governments consistently trying to bring some sort of regulatory framework around it. And we've seen, obviously, something that was known as the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill that was defeated in the Parliament. Obviously, there's a lot of stories that go around which could in themselves be classed as misinformation or disinformation. But, I just wonder what you thought of that bill.
I think the internet is full of misinformation and disinformation, and I don't know how you solve that with any legislation. I think you solve that with education, and I don't think that bill was ever going to do anything other than create havoc, create the wrong outcomes. Because if you look at it and say, okay, what we don't want as a government, if we want to pretend to be them, what we don't want is fake content on Facebook, telling people that we're going to do something when we're really not. That's the kind of misinformation. Started out as being this electoral misinformation. We don't want our elections being pushed one way or another because of what someone says on Facebook. Not a bad concept because, let's be real, that can sway things. But in the same tone, political parties are allowed to say whatever they want in advertising campaigns, send text messages to the entire country about what another party is going to do, and that's not misinformation. So if we're going to have misinformation bills, let's have truth in advertising, political advertising. Let's make politics have the same rules as society. I have had this long-term bugbear, as a parent mainly, about content on the internet being unmoderated and unrated. If you go turn on the television, even Netflix and Stan and those things, there's a rating next to a TV show and a movie. And when you press play, there's a thing that comes up and says, look, there's going to be adult themes, violence, whatever. It's not going to stop most people from watching something. But what it does do is allow me as a parent to say, kids, probably not this one, so let's find something else.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist on the internet. And how has government not sat there and gone, YouTube is just full of stuff. And then the violence and the gore and the death I see on Instagram is mind-blowing to me. So I feel like the whole thing was attacking the wrong part of the pile. We should be talking about making the online world as rated, regulated, and moderated as the offline world. And that's never going to happen. So waste of time government's talking about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think, as you say, particularly when it comes to young people, it's really about better parenting and not, abrogating those skills to a government department, because who's going to decide what the truth is? I mean, that's very much in everybody's individual perception.
That is a great point, and I've been saying it about other things. We're going to talk about parenting is critical here, right? You can let your kids run free, or you can, trap them in a little world and mollycoddle them, or you can be somewhere in between. And that's always been the way. I had mates that had far more freedoms than I did as a kid, and I had more freedoms than other kids had as when we were that age. But it just depends on what a parent's attitude was. In the end, society is built by the individuals in it, not by the legislation, but it needs to be, we need to have guidelines around it. We need to have some sort of bumpers on the lanes that allow those of us who are, first-time parents or fifth-time parents, whatever it might be, to determine which part of the lane we're happy in. And I just don't think that exists online, and that's the challenge that is creating all of these concerns that a government is now trying to fix, and I don't believe they can.
I sometimes feel like I'm sounding like my parents. Back in my day, we didn't have the internet, and I notice when I look in your studio and your videos, you've got a nice rotary dial telephone in the background there, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, for those days. But, we do live in an information age now. We think about when it came out, any sort of information that you want to get, even if you want to go into an echo chamber that suits what you want to hear, you can do that if you choose. I wonder with our politicians too. I mean, was this bill, is there this bunch of evil politicians sitting in Canberra thinking, well, we can control the message and all that, or is it really well-intentional, maybe a mix of both? I don't really know sometimes.
I am a optimist when it comes to the world of politics, but I'm a realist as well. I think I've not been close. I haven't lived and worked in Canberra, but I've worked in talk radio, and I've had family members work in politics and government to know enough about it to think that, look, I think they were trying to solve a problem and win votes.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't think there was any malice. I genuinely don't. I think that if they really wanted to control the internet or control your voices, I don't think there's a way they could do it, but I don't think they'd do it as publicly and as quickly as they did. So I think they would filter it somewhere else. But I don't believe there was ill intent. I just think it was rushed and poorly worded, and therefore defeated, and will never see the light of day again. And that's the problem with rushed legislation. It's gone forever.
It's certainly politically backfired on the government. There's no doubt about that. But it may come back in another form. I just wonder, there's another bill going through at the moment called the Online Safety Amendment Bill, of course, and we've all heard about that. It's aiming to limit access to social media to people of the age of 16 and over. Now, I don't know about you, Trevor. I've got a really favourite saying about mousetraps, and the saying goes, the better you make the mousetrap, the smarter the mice get. I can think back to the pre-internet days when there were times that perhaps you and I, there were things that we were forbidden from doing that we probably found a way to do when we were teenagers. And teenagers, I think, are pretty savvy these days. How do you think they could manage that, assuming they got it through?
You smuggle one magazine inside another.
I don't know what
your
you're
parents
talking
didn't know what you were reading. My motor magazines were a very different thing on the inside. And content today on the internet is wild. And so I do have grave concerns about the content that kids are exposed to. But as a father of three, and my kids are 13, 14 and turning 18, 17, turning 18. I've already seen it all. I've had massive dramas with social media with one child, which forced us to move their school.
Wow.
So don't get me wrong. I've seen it all, and I know the problems. And I also kind of have to always say this. I absolutely understand and respect the issues that have occurred in many families, the tragedies that have been caused in some way or in all by the interactions of social media. But banning social media won't work for a start. Physically impossible, and kids will find a way around whatever we do. The government introduced legislation which, at the time of recording, is going to go into legislation, and then it's 12 months they've given themselves to enact it, essentially. That's 12 months to work out how to verify the age of kids. Now, verifying the age of kids is impossible. Full stop, impossible. And I've spoken to the head of Instagram about this, who is, in my view, a very nice bloke with the best intentions to help parents and kids. And he said, listen, you try and tell that you put 50 kids in a line and tell me which one's 15, which one's 16. It's very hard for a human eye to do. So how does a computer eye do it? So, it's all well and good to say I can find the 13-year-olds in a pool of 1,000 13 to 16-year-olds, but how do you find the 15-and-a-half-year-olds compared to the 16 and 1 month-olds? It's just not possible. And so what you end up with here is a bill that is going the only way, if it goes into legislation and these tech companies are, threatened and forced into doing something like this, the only way for them to adhere to the legislation is to get every single person they admit onto their platform to verify their identity by handing over a driver's license, handing over a passport, or handing over a birth certificate. And do we want those details, A, handed over to a third party, and B, handed over at all?
Well, that's true. And there's a lot of talk around now about digital ID, which a lot of people are really sensitive to. The one thing I find interesting about that, if you have a page, so I have a page for my radio show, for example, on Facebook, people might not know this if you've just got your normal page. If you've got a business page, the amount of information that you can draw out about your audience from an entity like Facebook is staggering. The stuff they know about people, because let's face it, people like to tell Facebook about our lives and they store all that information. There's a price for it being free. With that in mind, if the government were to bring in a digital ID, I don't know, is that really that much different? I'm on the fence on that one.
Here's the thing. I am fully and 100% supportive of a government digital ID.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Now, a lot of people would absolutely freak out at that, but here's the thing. It exists today. If you haven't got it on your phone, honestly, you should. It's called MyGovID. I think they just renamed it to GovID. But, it's a government app. And you go through quite a process of, passport details and all these things, which it verifies with those departments. And then it's basically a capsule that says, we know who you are. And the plan for that, voluntarily, not by force, but the plan for that is to say, if you want to sign up for a new mobile phone account at Telstra, it says, what do you want? I want a new account. How do you want to verify yourself? Do you want to hand over all the information to Telstra, or do you want to click this button and verify it with the app that you've already got, which is run by the government? Mate, I trust the government 10,000 times more than I trust any private company with my data. Yeah. And so bring it on, I say. And the MyGovID could be a great solution to all these problems, because we could be handing over our, digital ID, just clicking a button, and you're not handing anything over, you're handing over a tick. I'm saying I'm real. I'm validating that I'm a real human being. Thank you, Facebook. Let me on now. Perfect. Let's go. But people have this distrust in a government ID because of, the Australia card back when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Look, the fact is, they've already got your info. They already know who you are.
They already know everything about you. Yeah, that's the thing.
The tax department, I don't know, MyGov itself, the passport department, have they ever been hacked? Ever? No. Your data has never been breached from a government organisation. That's the best place for your data to be. They have they spend stupid money on security because they cannot risk being hacked. Whereas a private company, Optus, for example,
yes,
didn't spend enough money. Medibank didn't spend enough money. If they spent the money the government spent, they wouldn't have got hacked.
I'm still smarting from the Optus one. I got caught up in the middle of that too, and it cost me a new driver's license.
I was in Optus, Medibank, Latitude, and I think there was a fourth one.
Good Lord, good Lord. Well, welcome to the club, I guess.
Yeah.
The clear signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My guest this first half hour is technology commentator and well-known journalist Trevor Long. Trevor, now I'm a bit of a practicing nerd, I've got to tell you, and I've done a lot of trade shows in my time. They've all been aviation and defence and all that sort of stuff, and I love that. I think the Mecca, the Disneyland, I think, for practicing nerds, and one I'd love to do is the Consumer Electronics Show in the US, CES. You've done that many times, I imagine. I've seen videos just recently that you've done from the last one. Can you explain to our listeners what CES is and why it's so amazingly cool?
I would trade you my credentials for CES for an aviation show one because I am a plane nerd, but we'll swap those contacts in the future.
We'll talk later, yeah.
So CES, Consumer Electronics Show, started like 50 years ago, 100 years ago. They give different dates because they draw on different histories. But anyway, this is the show where the VHS recorder was launched. This is where, TVs are launched every year. And my first one was in 2012, so I'm coming up on like 12, 13 years of it. Back then still it was where companies launched their products. Today it's a bit different. It's more of a, hey, showcase, this is exciting, this is cool, this is what's coming. But on the show floor, if you imagine the scale I've described to people it's like 11 MCG. So just think of the grass area of the MCG. It's 11 of those full of booths, stands, whether they're big or little. And there's 160,000 people, no members of the public. They are either the exhibitors, analysts, media, or most importantly, retailers. So it doesn't matter whether you are the audio buyer for Harvey Norman or the TV buyer for JB Hi-Fi or a small business person who is hoping to expand into technology. You've got a little kiosk or a shop. You buy a ticket, you go over there and you walk and you walk and you walk the halls looking for the next big thing. And you say, hey, do you want to sell into Australia? And you do a deal with them to get 10,000 units and at this price, and those deals are done there. The deals are not done as much there as they used to be for Harvey Norman and JB Hi-Fi and those kind of guys, but they still get to go there, look at some things, and they get to go into a back room that I don't even get to see, which shows them some even more futuristic things. And it's basically a peeing contest between tech companies to say, I'm better than you and our cool thing is better than your cool thing.
Yeah.
And they compete like that every single year. And I love it. It's a great mecca. It's a great way to start the year because it's the first week of January as well.
I'll tell you in aviation terms, and you might understand this being an aviation nerd, this could be the Oshkosh for electronics. And I think any budding pilot around the world might get that reference. I've done Oshkosh a couple of times. It sounds remarkably similar. The interesting thing you point out there is it's not just computers and it's not just the latest iPad, is it? I've seen things, one of the videos I just watched of yours, in fact, talked about a new brand of pram that's got some amazing technology in it.
Yeah. So there's your big companies. So there's one hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center that is pretty much just Sony, LG, Samsung, the big brands. And then there's another hall underneath the Venetian. So there's so many conference centers in Vegas that are taken up by that are one-by-one stands that they call Eureka Park, which are people that have paid bugger all and they've just got this cool idea. So you've got this kind of mix between someone that's a genuine startup trying to find the next big thing, and then you've got the person that's maybe in France selling this really cool pram, and they bring it to try and get exposure and excitement, and then hopefully get companies to say, we want that in our store. That's the goal. I met with a guy before CES last year here in Australia who said, oh, what do I do and where should I go? And he's got this product. And I went, well, you got to do this, this, and this. And then I spoke to him afterwards, kind of nervous for him that it was going to even work. And he was like, wow, this was amazing. We got so many leads, so many contacts, and we're now, 3 months away from launching. And, that's what it is. It's a launching block for products, large and small. But man, it's hit and miss. You can walk the halls and find nothing. You can walk other halls and find so many things. It's a very hard show to cover.
Do they do the concept of trade days versus public days? And a lot of air shows are like that, where all the big deals are done, like Avalon, the air show here in Melbourne, for example. That's open to the public for 2.5 days, but it's actually open for about 3 days before that. And there's actually a lot of even more cool tech that gets brought out in those trade days. That's the day as a journalist you want to be there. Is CES kind of the same? CES
is split up. It starts off with I'd call it day -1, where there's just a nighttime show for media only at a small venue where I'm assuming they pay big bucks to be there. And it's called Unveiled. It's where I go on a Sunday night to find pretty much all my stories and make all my videos for the week, because I can't find all this stuff on the show floor. The next day is just press day, so it's just press conferences. And then there's 4 days of the show, but there's no difference between any of them because there is no public admission. So no general public can just walk in or buy a ticket. You've got to have a analyst badge or an exhibitor badge or a press badge or something like that, or a retailer badge. There's a big show in Europe called IFA in Berlin every year in September that I go to. Very similar bit more appliance-based, where on, I think it's day 2, the public are just, and you're like walking around going, what are all these people doing? And then you realize it's just kids with their dads going to see the latest cool stuff. So that's a very different show. But CES, 100% non-public.
And tell us about that very cool flying car that was there. That's an interesting concept. There's actually a local manufacturer here in Melbourne that's working on a similar concept. We interviewed them last year. It was quite interesting. But this thing looks far more high-tech than what they're putting out.
Yeah, I think the one you're referring to, the blue and white one, it looked like a big kind of sports car, is the Xpeng. And they're actually a car company. So they do make cars. They're launching in Australia. They've got electric cars coming. And they've got this flying car they've had actually in Melbourne and Sydney in the recent months, which looks like a drone, looks like a big drone. But this thing they had at CES, and this is the whole purpose of CES, get attention, right? It just looked like a sick, big sports car. And then they press a button and essentially the roof opened up and out came 4 shafts, and on the end of the shafts were these propeller blades, which essentially the concept was it would be drivable and then flyable. Will it ever fly? Will it ever drive? I don't know. It's the one week of the year where I go, I don't care. It's January in Australia. It's, low news time. I'm a big stickler when I'm on the Today Show and on radio around the country. I'm a big stickler for, mate, if it's not available at JB's or Harvey's, I'm not talking about it. Like, it's got to be something people can tangibly buy. But January with CES, it's like, this is like, for me, Beyond 2000. It's like, as a kid, I loved watching Amanda Keller on Beyond 2000 talk about things that were just out there and maybe. So I remember seeing noise cancelling for the first time on Beyond 2000. And today, that's an everyday thing. So I look at CES and go, it doesn't matter whether it's coming or real or not. If it's interesting, let's make content about it.
Wasn't that such a great show, just diverging back to Beyond 2000 and towards 2000? They were the best shows. I mean, I assume you and I are probably of a similar vintage. I mean, growing, that was just an absolute do not miss show. And you had to, if you missed it, you had to make sure it was on your video recorder. Now, if our young people are listening.
I found a VHS the other day with some Beyond 2000 on it. I was so excited.
Have you still got any equipment to play it? That's the question.
Yeah, I've still got a VHS and I can run it in through the computer so I can ingest it. I'm that nerdy that I really want to capture that stuff as well. And for me, the best way to describe it to my kids is it's like, they wouldn't even understand this reference. It's like 60 Minutes for tech. It was long form content about tech. And like that's the content I'd love to make, but who's paying for that, right? That would cost, Amanda Keller would travel to Germany to look at a thing and probably spend a week on one 6-minute story. No one's doing that today. The money's just not there.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think, just as we sort of come to the end of the segment here, Trevor, that technology has advanced so much? How much more can we really push this sort of stuff? I often think of things like internet browsers. Is there really much more we can do with something as simple as that? No. We must be getting to a plateau, surely.
I don't know. It's funny that everyone seems to push the boundaries. What we're doing right now, people would know, is just we're on a website and I can see you can see me, and we can record. Like, it's phenomenal. Like, this is unbelievable. To me, this wasn't possible a few years ago in this kind of quality. So I think the boundaries are continually pushed in some ways. I think we've plateaued in tablets and smartphones, apart from the foldable small form factor smartphones, which is fascinating, but may not be mainstream for a long time, if ever. I think that the only area currently that has the potential to broadly open up is AI and search, because AI is exciting and interesting and fun, and there's some real hands-on stuff coming to iPhones and things like that, and there's some real benefits to using it online. But then when you add AI to search and you say, you just ask a question, and not only do you get an answer, but you get data and facts and information real time, because this AI knows about what's happening in the world right now, like sports scores and things like that. That's going to change everything. For you and I and anyone of our generation, we think back to when Yahoo, like the first time I was on the internet, I had a thing called the Internet Yellow Pages. I've still got one here somewhere. It's a book that had all the websites in it. And it was like, you wanted to find sport, you'd find sport, and they were really long addresses. Then we got Yahoo. That was a really cool directory of the internet. And then it changed forever with Google search. I believe that what we're experiencing right now with AI will be the beginning of the next massive change for the internet. And I think generationally, we'll look back at that in the same way that we did the search generation.
You know what, Trevor? I think we're going to have to get you back on for another show and talk about AI, because I could talk about that all day long. It just fascinates me. Trevor, you do so much work on media and around the place, but tell people where they can find you online.
Best way to find me is EFTM.com is my website. You can download the app, EFTM, and everything I do turns up there.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Coming up after the break, we're going to be looking at the state of Australia's automotive market with motoring journalist John Cadogan.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
Keeping up to date with the latest news is a huge part of our daily lives. Now you can have news on demand with the Australian Independent Radio News app. News and sport in your pocket whenever you want it. Wherever you are in the world, if you call Australia home, you can stay in touch with the Air News app. Download it now for news on the go.
This is Air News.
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 Australian Independent Radio News.
Close your eyes and think about what you want to become. Now add a little extra excitement and a fair bit of adventure. Then picture mates around you just as dedicated and interested as you are. Imagine getting specialised training in your choice of job, plus unique experiences that money can't buy. Got a pen to write down this number and web address? Because chances are, no matter what occupation you imagine, you'll find it, with over 60 different jobs to choose from in the Air Force.
Call 131901 or visit defencejobs.gov.au. Air Force. Accomplished.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with Steve Vischer.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second half hour of the show. Well, it's time to talk motoring, one of my favourite pet subjects. John Cadogan is the founder at autoexpert.com.au, a long-time motoring journalist and a very, very honest one too. I'm sure if you've seen some of his work online, I'm looking forward to having a chat with him. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the car market, it's interesting. If I think back a few years to what I like to refer to as the COVID tyranny, that time, supply chains were disrupted everywhere. And if you wanted to buy a car during that time, well, it wasn't really an easy thing. And I remember even a year or so later, going into a local Toyota dealer down here in Melbourne and looking at an SUV and being told I'd have to wait 3 years for it. How is the market looking these days? Has that sort of supply chain disruption and those long wait times, has that kind of gone by the wayside now?
Things are much better now, but the whole market did not improve in a uniform fashion. I'd suggest that Toyota was one of the most seriously affected car companies by those shortages, and it took them longer to recover on some models. Like until quite recently, it was more than a year's wait for a vehicle like a Toyota RAV4 hybrid, whereas what we see overall in the market when I talk to people buying and selling cars all the time, that average delivery wait times. So you sign a contract with a dealer and then you have to wait a particular period of time until they've bolted on the number plates and got the car ready for you and ordered it from the importer and got it in stock, whatever they need to do to get it for you. The average time there's kind of 10 days to 2 weeks, but it depends on the make and model, and it is significantly longer for some other cars.
So much is made in good times of global supply chains and how well they work, but it didn't take much disruption to really throw that into chaos.
The whole market was affected, but not all brands were affected equally. And because the car market is so global, the higher end models of many manufacturers' model ranges were more seriously affected than the poverty packs in the same model. And that's simply because the higher end models have more equipment and more likely that some of those circuit boards or widgets, whatever, that are only available in those higher end models wouldn't be forthcoming from places like China. It's really interesting, actually. Kia Carnival Platinum was affected like that. You couldn't get the range-topping Platinum, but you could get the others in the range. And interestingly enough, the Ford Ranger, which we all kind of know was revamped with a new model, I'm going to say a couple of years ago now, that revamp, the launch of that new model was delayed substantially because 390, I think was the number, 390 parts that are required for that vehicle had to be sourced from China, and they could not be sourced. And that was what was stopping the whole production line from just churning out Rangers like Australia's most popular car, which it is.
And that's an interesting concept in itself. I look at the Ranger and you see so many of them being used in supermarkets for pickups of just groceries and, the school drop-offs these days. Back in my day when I was a young fella, you would not have seen that with that sort of class of vehicle. That and SUVs just seem to have taken the whole market by storm this last decade or so.
Well, I look at you and you've got a little bit you've got a little bit more hair than me, it's fair to say, seeing as I have none. But the interesting thing, like when we were kids and you looked at the supermarket, it was all family wagons like Kingswoods and Falcons, right? And they've just disappeared. Station wagons are a dead segment, and they've been replaced by big SUVs and utes. In fact, utes have become what Tiranas and GT Falcons and Monaros were back when we were kids. They were just, they don't have the same performance, obviously, but you can work on them and bolt stuff onto them and make a statement about who you are and what you are. And essentially that's what the ute class, or, you know, that's what the personally owned ute class has become.
You know, not far from me, just down the road, in fact, is a dealer that sells those American brands. I think it's a Ram they sell. And I just happened to be walking past that the other day and looking at them, and the cheap ones was about $100,000 and the up-spec one was about $150,000. Who's got the sort of money to be buying cars like that? Are they really moving a lot of those type of utes in the market?
I think they've analysed the market and they've got, I guess you'd call it parity of supply and demand for those cars. Not many people are buying $150,000 utes, but plenty of people are buying Rams and F-150s and Silverados. Like, they're never going to be the biggest selling vehicles in the ute category, but there is certainly a market for them, and you know, it'd be a pretty profitable market, even though some of those vehicles have to be virtually re-engineered because they're not manufactured over in America with right-hand drive. They have to be converted here in Australia, and that's a big job. And that's why, in part, those vehicles are so much more expensive here in Australia than they are in left-hand drive form over in the USA.
The very first guest I had on this show right back in week number 1 was former Olympian Andrew Bogut. Now, I know he drives one of those Rams. He's right into his cars. He's about the only guy I reckon that actually suits that, because he's about 9 feet tall and he's got long legs. But your average person, my wife, who's about 5'0", she wouldn't be able to see over the dash of one of those things.
They are remarkably huge. Like, they do kind of have their own postcode. It's a bit interesting, actually. If you went back in time 25 or 30 years and looked at not just the utes, but all of the cars, like if you looked at a Hilux from 30 years ago, or even a Toyota Corolla from 30 years ago, you'd be gobsmacked at how tiny they are. Even the first Honda CR-Vs, Subaru Foresters, Toyota RAV4s, things of that nature, what the car industry actually does iteratively is every new model that lobs gets bigger, because the car industry has to offer you more with a new model. So it has to be bigger, it has to be more powerful, it has to have more features. And what happens then is, like, look at a Corolla, for example. Eventually you do that often enough with more and more new models over time, and you end up with this gap where you need a vehicle smaller than a Corolla, so they have to invent a Yaris just to jam in the range, because the Corolla used to be the tiny car, and now it's not. Now it's almost like young family-size car.
It's not a bad thing. Yeah, in fact, it's funny about the Toyota, isn't it? Everybody bags Toyotas, but if I was to look back and think about probably the best car I've ever owned, it was probably also the most boring car I've ever owned, and that was a 2015 brand new Camry. It just got the job done. It was a great car. The only problem I ever had with that car was one flat tire.
It seems like there's two different things. If you want style and performance and all of that stuff, you can get that. But it seems to me that generally you have to throw reliability and resale value under the bus if you tick that box, right? And if you want reliability and resale value, you have to just get sex appeal and throw it under the bus in the automotive domain. You know, there's never been a brilliantly reliable, sexy performance car that also had sensational resale value and never broke down, cost virtually nothing to keep on the road. You know, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of cars of questionable quality, I've got to tell you, John, I've had a couple of experiences recently, one through a panel beater experience where I was given a rental one, and once where I went up to Canberra just a couple of months ago for a family trip, and both times we were furnished with Chinese-made cars. I've just actually got my car back from the panel beaters, and I was driving in the interim something called a Haval H6. I get why people would buy them. They're cheap, but boy, what a heap of junk.
Here's the thing about emerging car manufacturers. If you go back to the 1990s and you look at the very first Hyundai Excel, it was a steaming pile of junk, right? It just really was. And if you look at the first Corolla, which I think, don't quote me, came out in 1967 or something like that, we were kids. We used to stand on the side of the road and see, Hey Charger come past, and we'd put the two fingers up, which was the advertising campaign for Charger. They had all sorts of cool people with the peace sign, raised. And when a Japanese car like a new Corolla, which was the first Corolla, would steam past, we just all shout out a Jap crap like this, right? Now, things were not the politically correct cesspool that they are today.
Of course.
We got away with that. No one chastised us for saying that. But the car industry evolves like this. New manufacturers come in and they have to establish a foothold somehow. So they sell cheap cars of low quality, and then they rapidly evolve. It was fair enough to call those cars Jap crap back in the day because they were Japanese and they were crap, but they rapidly evolved. And the first Hyundai XL was pretty much a piece of crap as well. And that brand rapidly evolved roughly twice as quickly as the Japanese brands evolved. And I think the Chinese are doing that as well. So they're in the market now at a cheap price point with relatively low quality, but they will evolve even more rapidly than the South Korean entrants. And that's just kind of how the car industry rolls. But if you buy, for example, a Chinese ute right now, like a Great Wall or something, and you expect it to be just like a Hilux or a Ranger, but half the price sort of thing, then you're deluding yourself. That's not how it works.
You get what you pay for, as the saying goes. Probably the brand I see the most around here, and I'm based in Melbourne, I assume it's the same in Sydney and everywhere else, is MG. They seem to be selling zillions of those.
MG's kicked off with the MG3, which is a very cheap car with very few features of, let's be frank, questionable quality. But in a kind of a short space of time, they are now one of the top 10 car brands by sales in Australia. And I'd have to say, having driven their MG4 electric car, it was much more impressive than I thought it was going to be. So this rapid evolution will probably only take companies like MG sort of 5 years,
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My guest this second half hour is John Cadogan from autoexpert.com.au. John, we were talking about Chinese cars there and their incursion into the market. Of course, along with that comes the ever-increasing prominence of, well, not only Chinese, but electric vehicles in general. You know what? I'm not against them. I just think some people that buy them are a little bit cult-like, but I know people that buy them just swear by them.
Okay, so a lot of people accuse me of being an EV hater, and that's not the case. I actually lived with an EV. It was a Kona Electric, a Hyundai Kona Electric, for a year, and I really liked that car. I enjoyed driving it. I never once missed the fuel station and being asked if I felt like the unbeatable 2-for-1 Kit Kat meal deal, That was a highlight, and cheap to run and all that stuff. Silent as well. You have to be a bit careful adapting to the silence, because when you're going fast in a combustion car, it makes noise and it warns you that you might be on the cusp of losing your license. But very easy to overcook it on the speed front with an electric car because they are quite silent. Anyway, the thing about electric cars is that there's a limited usage case for them, and the benefit, in my view, is overstated. So let's talk about the usage case. If you can park off the street in your own garage and plug it in somehow, then maybe that can work for you. And if you only do a short amount of driving every day and you never want to drive into a deeply regional or remote place, then an electric car might suit you down to the ground, okay? But if you don't have the ability to charge it yourself at home because you don't have off-street parking. For example, if you're even a tenant instead of an owner of a house, the owner might not like you installing charging infrastructure in their premises. I don't know. If you live in a unit, the body corporate's going to have issues with charging and things of this nature. So there's all of those issues that overstate the benefits of electrification because it just doesn't suit everyone. And then there's the benefit to our emissions. Like, it's the electrification of the motor vehicle fleet is not going to prevent climate change. It's just not. It's not because it can't. You know, the emissions from light vehicles, let's back up a sec. Transport is about 20% of emissions, and light vehicles like utes and vans and cars and SUVs are about half of that. So they're about 10% of emissions. So if I get Harry Potter's wand and I wave it around and make every vehicle on Australian roads an EV tomorrow, that makes, at the best possible interpretation, 10% difference to our emissions. And that's not counting the electricity we'd have to create to charge those cars. So to me, as a climate change countermeasure, the benefit is overstated. And the other thing is there is this sort of tribal, cult-like, quasi-religious aspect of EV ownership where the owners seem to be in a cult, right? And I don't mind driving an electric car, but I don't want to be in your cult. You know what I mean? It's just a car. It's just a car with an alternative powertrain.
A lot is also made from people who are skeptical, I guess, of these cars, is the environmental impact just of producing those batteries. It's almost as if you're transferring the environmental impact, you know, from one country to another.
Well, here's the thing about the batteries, right? I trained as an engineer. I remember all of that stuff, most of it anyway. The batteries are full of nickel, manganese, cobalt, and chemicals of this nature. These chemicals of metals are very hard to extract from the world, and they could hypothetically be recycled, right? But in practice, they're not recycled. They're just thrown away. That's what happens. There's a great report from the CSIRO about the lithium-ion battery waste problem, which is going to increase by orders of magnitude. And our regulators, Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese and the people like them who are steamrolling these climate change countermeasures in place, are not doing anything to protect us from the looming environmental catastrophe of having untold tons of battery waste at the end of their life. And they really need to integrate the batteries and the vehicles into society. It's not the same thing as just selling a few electric cars. We have to get the charging infrastructure right, and we have to have a chain of custody about who's responsible for the metals in the batteries, because recycling them would be great. But if they're not recycled and they get into the groundwater, lithium hexafluorophosphate in the groundwater is ever so slightly Erin Brockovich, and I don't want to be living near any of that, you know?
No, I can. Yeah, it's a worry, and it seems short-sighted. I had Trevor Long on in the first half hour, and I know he's a great proponent of these vehicles. And I talked to him about where we are generally with technology, and have we seen plateaus? Do we think we've seen a plateau in battery technology, or are they looking at ways we can't obviously rely on lithium batteries? There's got to be other technologies they're working on that are better.
There's all kinds of prospective technology in the wings, and there always has been. The problem with cool-sounding technology is, speaking as an engineer, it's generally overhyped. And it's one thing to get, let's say, supercapacitors or sodium batteries. They're two of these kinds of technology. It's one thing to have them in the wings or in a lab, but it's absolutely another thing to productionize them and make them work. See, lithium-ion batteries are not new. They were commercialized in the 1990s. There's no real exciting new mineral that we can replace the lithium with. And we know this because we know the periodic table of the elements. And there are no magic vibranium. That's only in Marvel movies, right? The chemistry is a science. We know all of the elements, and it's really difficult to deploy alternative battery technology. And lithium-ion battery technology is mature. It's been here for 30 years. So the best we can hope for is incremental, gradual increases in effectiveness and efficiency. And invariably what we see manufacturers do with batteries is they pump up some characteristics of the battery, like how quickly they can discharge to make more power or how quickly they can be recharged. And they do that by skewing the chemistry and the production technology slightly. But when you do that, there's a compromise with things such as safety and longevity, like how long they last. So some of those quote unquote improvements are really just, pumping this bit up, but actually losing something on the back end in this engineering compromise kind of way.
Just fiddling around the edges, really. What about the economics of electric cars? They are if you look at a car that's, say, the size of your average ICE-powered Mazda 6, let's pick that one out of the blue. You will pay a premium to buy a similar size car in, say, the Tesla brand. There's got to be an equation there about how long it takes to pay off that differential versus one buying the other.
Certainly there is. I mean, it's $15,000 to $20,000 more for the electric car, spec for spec, apples for apples kind of comparison. And that's why I have to laugh every time I hear someone with a vested interest say, electric cars are a great hedge against the cost of living crisis because they're so much cheaper to run. And I'm sort of saying to myself here, well, spend 20 grand more up front is a real interesting place to start dealing with the cost of living crisis.
It's going to take a lot of extra kilometres to make up the difference between, buying one of those and just buying a petrol-powered car, I think. And that's something that I think that industry and perhaps our regulators are going to have to address. I know there's significant tax advantages to buying an EV here in Australia because obviously the government's ideologically orientated towards them. And the other thing too is when I go into my local service station, I can be in and out of there in 5 minutes. We need to somehow find a way to not only make a car similarly priced, but similarly convenient to operate.
Well, there's a brilliant story by a female journalist in Daily Mail. She drives from Sydney to Melbourne regularly, like a couple of times a month or something, and she does it in a balmy old Corolla. So she put the bite on Hyundai for an Ioniq 5 electric car just to test to see how it went driving from Sydney to Melbourne. So she does that, and she puts up the puppy, like the family puppy, and she's got her young child in the car. This drive costs like 50% more and takes twice as long because she's in an electric car. And, public charges are not cheap. So the price of actually the quote-unquote fuel just to do it was substantially more. And the amount of time she had to spend at public charging stations and the inconvenience of that generally was just outrageous. And in some places, like you can't charge an electric car without the app on your phone. And she's on Vodafone, so she's at one charger and she's got no Vodafone signal and she needs to get charged. So she has to walk like half a K to McDonald's and petition a bystander that she doesn't know from Adam to plug the car in with the puppy and the daughter in the car while she waves from hundreds of metres away because she's got signal using the Macca's free Wi-Fi. So this is what I mean about integrating the technology into society. It has to be seamless. Chargers need to have an FPOS, swipe thing for those times when the app doesn't work. And it's just not very well thought out at the granular detail level.
It seems to me that the manufacturers of these vehicles are saying, well, this is how it works, and the consumer will have to adapt to us. That's not the way consumerism works. It's like you make something the consumer wants, and then they'll buy it.
Well, we got three different silos, right? We've got regulators who are just interested in what are the rules and let's get to net zero and all this kind of thing. And we got car manufacturers going, hey, check out our exciting new car. And we've got the manufacturers of chargers in a different silo over here going, yeah, we're rolling out chargers. They're awesome. But they don't do the integration. They just don't talk well enough to each other.
I tell you what. Now, your website, of course, is autoexpert.com.au. One of the prominent features I notice on there, John, is the lemon list. Tell us about the lemon list, cars you shouldn't buy.
Okay, so here's what makes me the antichrist of motoring journalists is that I don't really have any skin in the game of keeping car makers happy. So my unique selling proposition is I call them out when they behave badly. And there's so much of that conventional motoring journalists don't report, right? And that's simply because there's a bad incentive in motoring journalism, which is that the publications online or in print, whatever, it doesn't matter, podcasts, they all require advertising revenue to stay afloat, and the advertising revenue comes from car makers, and therefore you don't want to make car makers cranky, do you? So you can't report those stories, and that's why I conceived the lemon list, and that's why I call car makers out when they behave badly. It's just essentially because none of my competitors, quote unquote, are doing that.
I noticed that it's interesting. I noticed Jeep features prominently in that list, and I always find that a shame. I hear lots of bad stories about that brand, yet it's so tempting to buy. Like, it's such a nice looking vehicle, some of those Jeeps. Well, I think they are.
One of the best vehicles I ever test drove was a Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8. That thing is a muscle car in the body of a Grand Cherokee. It's the car Jack Bauer drives to save the world, right? And I loved it. I was prepared for the sheriff to come over and issue me a writ to hand it back. You know, I didn't want to give it back that badly. I was prepared to just abscond with it, but you got to be kidding about owning it, right? The reality of owning a Jeep is that Jeep was on a roll a few years ago. They sold 30,000 cars here. This year, they'll be lucky to sell 2,000, right? The sales have collapsed. There are so many stories about bad support and extortionate repair costs that you're better off just, you know, looking at them from across the bar but never buying them a drink, right? Because it'll just end in disaster.
I think that's great advice to finish up on. Once again, autoexpert.com.au, John, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope we can do it again. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Nice to talk to you, Steve.
And there we have it as another edition of The Clear Signal comes to a close. Well, a couple of great discussions there. Now, don't send me any hate mail, all you EV owners. I know how much you love your cars and you're welcome to drive them. But there are a few, topics there that John talked about that I think are well worth considering, and I'm sure we'll get there with the technology in the end. Thanks also to Trevor Long for dropping in and talking about technology and making me very jealous about going to CES. I think I'm going to have to put that on my bucket list for one of these days. It's a mecca, as I mentioned, for tech nerds such as myself, and I'll have a whole week to think about that until I talk to you again next time. We'll be back in a week's time with more of The Clear Signal. Until then, have a great week, folks. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.